The Upper Room Daily Devotional Guide has been a beloved resource for personal spiritual growth for generations and around the world. Its roots can be traced back to Travis Park Church in 1934. This was the time just after the Great Depression when people and communities were working to recover from very difficult times. Churches were looking for ways to encourage believers to turn to God, to build strength through faith, and hope for the future. At the time, there were no publications to support these practices, so the time was right for a new, bold idea. This is where Travis Park Church and Frances Craig come in. Frances was a wonderful woman who was an active leader in our church. She encouraged and supported her pastor, Paul Kern, to write and distribute devotional materials, and she saw what a great impact they had in her personal ministry with the ill and homebound. She was also a leader in Methodist mission work on a national level as volunteer director of the Committee on Devotional Literature. Her experiences and observations grew into a dream of a daily devotional guide that could reach more people. Meanwhile, Grover Emmons, a Methodist pastor, joined the staff of the denomination's Board of Home Missions, Evangelism, and Hospitals in Nashville. He too had a vision of finding new ways to help individuals and families cultivate an acquaintance with God. In December 1934, with Frances Craig and others on the Committee on Devotional Literature, a plan was established to publish a quarterly devotional booklet to be sold in the local church through the Missionary Committee as an experiment for 1 quarter. Frances Craig brought news of the project back home to Travis Park and marshaled her forces. She was the teacher of the Philathea class, a group of more than 100 women who were committed to mission work and spiritual growth. The Philathea class had a long and active history of visiting the sick, sewing for orphanages, volunteering at hospitals, and caring for their community. Their official motto was, "We do things." So Frances asked them to pray for the work of the devotional guide, which they did with great enthusiasm. Let's pause from the story for a moment with a question. Where exactly at Travis Park Church was the Upper Room Devotional born? Church folklore says that it was in the quaint room at the top of the spiral staircase inside our corner tower. Though this is a beautiful room and it makes a beautiful story, this is actually a myth. If we were to pin down an actual location where the Upper Room was born at Travis Park, it would probably be the balcony where the Philathea Sunday School class met each week. But more accurately, the Upper Room's origins were really in the experiences and faithful work of a Travis Park woman whose leadership influenced the writings of her pastor, the collaborative work of a church agency, and the prayerful support of her community. So back to our story. The first issue of the Upper Room came out in early 1935 with this newly selected name, the Upper Room, inspired by the passage in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 14, about the power of God that descended upon Jesus and the disciples when they gathered for the Last Supper. The number of issues in the first printing was a big leap of faith at 100,000. That first issue sold out, and interest in the little book soared as readers really took to the daily habit of using the Upper Room for prayer and study. From the start, the magazine was intended to reach beyond the Methodist Church, focusing on what Christians held in common rather than on their differences. The format of each daily devotional entry was and still is this: a scripture verse, a suggested scripture reading, a reflection, a prayer, and a closing thought. At first, the Upper Room editors provided all of the content, but soon readers were submitting their own meditations, and authorship was opened up to more creative and diverse writers. These contributions added to the popularity and growth of the Upper Room, and by 1938, circulation had reached 1 million copies and was being translated into 3 additional languages. Through the decades, the Upper Room has continued to grow in its impact on the world. It is now distributed in more than 100 countries and is translated into more than 40 languages. As our church celebrates our first 175 years, we remember the many who have worked to find new ways to study and pray together, imagining new ways to connect with other seekers in small and sometimes global ways to grow closer to the nature of God.